It capped weeks of negotiations. It set the stage for a tense period that could determine the course of the war. What happens next is something that depends on these 4 days. Shortly after Hamas militants, Hamas terrorists took hostages during the deadly assault on the 7th of October, the government of Qatar contacted White House with a request. Form a small team of advisors to help work with Hamas and ensure these captives are freed. That should be priority number one, was the deal. The secretive effort included personal diplomatic engagement by US President Joe Biden, who held a number of conversations with the Emir of Qatar and the Israeli Prime Minister in the weeks that led up to this deal finally being seen in reality. Now, initially, the Israelis argued that the terms were not so firm. There was no proof of life for these hostages. What exactly were we negotiating for was what Israel was asking, which is also why they did not want to hold back on their ground offensive on the Gaza Strip. There was a lot of back and forth as far as these deals went, but then eventually Qatar did manage to get Hamas on board to produce details of the 50 hostages it would be releasing in this first phase. That's how the 4-day ceasefire pact actually came into being. Now, this agreement also opens up a window for strategic shifts for further negotiations, potentially influencing the future course of this long-standing conflict. What we see over the last 48 days is just one aspect of it. This is something that has been going on for decades together, is what many who fight for the Palestinian cause say, and that is where we must understand the issue is what they say. Now, once the ceasefire ends in 4 days, unless there's an extension, Israeli troops will maintain their positions in northern Gaza. Extension or not, Hamas may use this time, at least these 4 days, to strategize to regroup, given that many of their stockpiles are now with the Israeli Defense Forces, all of which were found under tunnels, inside tunnels, under hospitals especially on the Gaza Strip. Hamas could potentially increase their demands as well. They could sense leverage with this particular deal. In fact, they also came out and said that we can get all of the Palestinian prisoners freed with the amount of hostages we have with us. The pressure is mounting on Israel, especially after this 4-day ceasefire, because the families of the remaining hostages are going to be mounting pressure. They would want the release of their loved ones to be secured as well before Israel goes back to pounding Gaza. Even though Israel vows to continue its fight against Hamas, a longer truce could make restarting the war harder for Israel, both operationally and also in the eyes of the global public opinion. Which is why it's very important that this deal does not fall through, that we see this ceasefire truce actually happen, and the next 4 days are extremely crucial for that. But is this just the beginning of the end? Well, time will tell. But what has happened so far is also something that will determine what happens from here on. Take a look at how the war in West Asia has unfolded so far.
إلى سكان قطاع غزة، الحرب لم تنتهي، الهدنة الإنسانية مؤقتة. منطقة شمال قطاع غزة هي منطقة حرب خطيرة وممنوع التجول بها من أجل سلامتها.
Hello, Moto.
It is a good beginning. Where latest that we are gathering from now from the Israeli Prime Minister's office is that all 13 Israeli hostages have now been freed. They are with the Red Cross in Egypt. That confirmation has come to the fore from the Israeli Prime Minister's office itself. 12 Thai nationals have also been released as a confirmation that came in separately from Thailand. So what does this mean? Are we expecting this to continue the way it has today for the next 4 days? And what next as far as this war in West Asia is concerned? To decode that, joining me on this broadcast is Edward P. Joseph, faculty of the Johns Hopkins University. Faisal Saleh, founder of the Palestine Museum in the United States, is with me as well. Jay Engelmeyer, publisher and executive editor of The Judean, and former Indian diplomat Ashok Sajjanhar joins us on this broadcast. Let me begin this discussion with Jay Engelmeyer. We've seen a good start as far as release of hostages is concerned. There was a slight delay of a few minutes, but the confirmation has come to the fore from the Israeli side that, as promised, 13 of the Israeli hostages have been released. We have another 3 days to go. Are you confident Hamas is going to hold up their end of the bargain?
I'm confident that they're going. Sorry, I'm confident that they're going to try to hold up their end of the bargain. I think that Hamas, and one of the reasons that there's been delays is that Hamas is unsure of where all of the hostages are. I think that one of the problems is Hamas is not an honest broker, and I think that we've seen it before. They've made ceasefires before, and Israeli soldiers have died during those ceasefires in previous campaigns. And I think that's something that Israel is looking to protect their soldiers over. And I just think that, look, I apologize, I'm slightly emotional because it's been a very, very long day. And I think that now that at least 13 of them are finally home, it's a wonderful gift. I just hope that the rest of them do come home. And I don't just mean the 50 that are agreed to. I mean everybody that's being held there. And I pray that Hamas actually can live up to the agreements that they went ahead and signed when it came to this ceasefire.
That's what really the world is hoping for as well. But Faisal Saleh, it's a day of happiness, a day of hope, not just for the families of these 13 Israelis, but also for several other Palestinian families. Several of these Palestinians have also been freed in exchange. Several who were in Egypt have also come back home because of the ceasefire today. Is this a good sign? And is this something that should continue, not just for the next 4 days, but perhaps to ensure that this war ends, perhaps something long term?
Yeah, ma'am, I'm not seeing any video of you or anybody talking, but I mean, I can continue to talk, but in the meantime, could you
Sure, we'll try and fix that. We'll try and fix that, sir, but please go ahead. We can hear and see.
I'll talk.
Yes.
I'll continue talking. Well, I think you did a very good job at the beginning, providing the background and explaining exactly what's happening. And I think this is a step in the right direction, and it's a welcomed relief from the relentless bombing that Israel had been carrying out in Gaza for the last few weeks. And I am hoping that the ceasefire will be respected, and then the result of it would be saving a lot of lives, thousands of lives during the next few days. And we hope that this will be followed by further easement of the tensions and possibly resolution of the current crisis.
That's really the hope, but what happens once this 4-day ceasefire ends, Edward P. Joseph? Can we expect an extension, or like Israel says, we are going to come back in full force, and that perhaps might just worsen the matter?
I think you just put your finger on exactly the question. I'll come to that in a second. First, let me greet the other respected guests and your viewers and say I completely share the relief, the tremendous relief here for innocent Palestinian civilians who following this war that was launched by Hamas on October 7th, following this criminal seizure of these some 240 Israeli hostages, and others from other nationalities, including these Thai nationals who have utterly nothing to do with this conflict and criminally, brutally seized by Hamas for no reason, really. I also share in the relief for innocent Palestinian civilians who have been suffering terribly, and many of whom have died. Many of those who have died are Palestinian children. We mourn for all of those, and I share completely in the relief, and the relief for the Israeli families, some of whom these children have seen and witnessed their parents being shot and killed by Hamas. So this is relief across the board. Anyone who is human, anyone with a human heart has to be relieved. And to your question, exactly the right question, what will happen after this 4-day? First, this 4-day pause or ceasefire, which so many have been demanding for. So now we have to see first the rest of the terms of the deal are respected by both sides. This is an encouraging start here, but it's really then, once the 4 days, your question goes right to it. it comes to Hamas. Does Hamas want to protect and prioritize the safety and security and health of innocent Palestinian civilians, or does it want to continue to wage war of extermination on Israel? Not a war of liberation, not a war of two states living side by side, as so many other Palestinians and Israelis want. But that's not Hamas's objectives, and we have to be very clear here that there is the possibility, apparently, for this more for more. That is another day of this ceasefire respite, which of course we all want to see happen for the Palestinian civilians, but Hamas has to continue to release 10 Israeli hostages. That was the understanding, to continue this. But does Hamas want that, or does Hamas want to continue its overarching political aim, which is not justice, because justice is not achieved by killing 250, 60 kids at a concert, shooting parents in front of children. That's not the objectives of liberation. That's not liberation. Many Palestinians want and deserve liberation, deserve a Palestinian state, as the United States has stood for and is trying to press for, and President Biden is trying to press for that. But there is absolutely clarity on the American side. President Biden has made it very clear there is no space for Hamas in this future. Even Bernie Sanders, the leader of the progressives in the United States, has unflinchingly called Hamas a terrorist group, said Hamas has to go, while he has also been very clear about criticizing Israel, criticizing indiscriminate bombing, and also Israeli policies on the West Bank, as has President Biden criticized those policies.
May I respond, please?
Yes, sir.
May I respond?
Yes.
The gentleman who just spoke really did. I appreciate his hopeful remarks about the exchange and what it represents, etc. However, he really laid all kinds of allegations against the Palestinians here without mentioning what Israel does and what Israel has done prior to October 7th. Israel has been engaged in a ruthless operation of occupation, apartheid, and killing of Palestinians in the West Bank and other places on a daily basis. Israel has been conducting terrorism against Palestinians for 56 years of occupation, and there is nothing that Hamas has done or does that Israel doesn't do 40 times and 100 times more. I challenge any of you to name one thing that Hamas has done that Israel hasn't done to the Palestinian multifolds. For example, Hamas kidnapped people. Israel has 5,000 people that they kidnapped and put in their prisons, and the majority of them have no charges against them. Israel protects the settlers that go around killing Palestinians and burning their trees and conducting pogroms against them in towns like Hawara. So Israel are not a bunch of Boy Scouts. They're just involved with terrorism as anyone else, and they should be on the State Department list of terrorist states if the United States has been objective and not an ally of the State of Israel. So let's not forget that.
Sure. But if we go with this eye for an eye sort of strategy, then where does that leave us, and where does that leave the entire world, not just the region? That's really the question many are asking today as well. But I want to get in Ashok Sajjanhar in as well on this debate. We're getting those visuals coming in of the exchange happening on both sides. We have confirmation that the Israeli hostages have been freed. They're now in Egypt. There is going to be an extensive medical checkup, both physically, psychologically. All of that is going to happen before they actually get to meet with their families. There perhaps is going to be debriefing that happens as well. And on the other side, we have pictures coming in of Palestinians who are also reuniting with their family. But Ashok Sajjanhar, I want to ask you this. Do you think that there is a possibility that Hamas could actually sense leverage in this entire situation? Because they might just dig in their heels, and we had them come out just a short while ago and say that we have enough hostages. We can get all of our prisoners out of Israeli jails. Will they then use that as a bargaining chip and actually dig in their heels?
Well, thank you very much, Poonam, for having me on the show. You know, if Hamas had this possibility of freeing all their hostages, getting all their hostages freed, they would have used all that leverage over the last 48 days. And we have seen that really whatever leverage that might be, and there is significant, considerable leverage, I don't deny that, but it has not worked. You know, as far as Israel is concerned, what it had declared on the 7th of October, that it is going to pulverize the Hamas establishment in Gaza, and they have gone after them relentlessly, and they will continue to do that. So I think Hamas is definitely on the back foot. They might have this advantage of holding the hostages, but that also is not been enough to keep Israel restrained in any manner. And I think what is being done today, Israel is giving a breather, just a pause. It's not a ceasefire, and it is getting its hostages released, and it is providing also some Palestinian prisoners also are being given up. That is the ratio is 1:3, and here also it is basically children and women who are in prison who are being released, you know, those who might have been the stone pelters and stone throwers. I don't think that the cards are all in the hands of Hamas. I don't think they have the possibility of going back on the deal. It is the pressure on Israel over all these many days, 48 days. International pressure might have come onto Israel, but Israel has stood its ground, and I think it is getting its hostages back basically on its own terms. It has been able to, destroy to a very significant extent the infrastructure of the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. As far as many of the tunnels are concerned, which are under the hospitals or schools or madrasas, etc., you know, they have been captured. So I think the infrastructure there, which Hamas was relying on, that seems to have disappeared. So the only thing what they can do in either 4 days, 6 days, 8 days, I think that can that is not all that significant. Maybe getting all their fighters out of the region, out of the zone, so that, you know, they can fight.
Sure, it definitely does give them time to regroup and re-strategize, perhaps. That is, and it works both ways. Perhaps the IDF would get that as well too. But we were talking about international pressure, and I want to get in Jay Engelmeyer as well. It's not just international pressure on Israel, it's also the domestic pressure on Israel, isn't it? Because we've seen there have been several such prisoner swaps in the past as well. In 2011, unprecedented number of prisoners were freed from Israeli jails for one soldier who was held captive by Hamas. So there is precedent in this, but in this case, there were 48 days before a truce agreement was actually reached. There must be some sort of public anger, public ire against the Netanyahu government there.
No. So one of the things that actually Hamas has done, and I have to thank Mr. Saleh for that, because on October 6th, Israel was a divided nation politically, and on October 7th, the country became united. There are people who do not like Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's fine. There are people who do not like his opponents, and that's fine as well. But right now, it's not about politics. It's about the war. It's about getting the hostages home, and it's about eliminating Hamas. I do want to agree with Mrs. Sujanar that this is not a ceasefire. This is a cessation of hostility. The war will continue, and the war will continue because the Israeli people want it to continue. Why do they want it to continue? Because this is ridiculous. You don't go in, you don't go into people's homes, take their babies at 6 o'clock in the morning, kill the mothers and fathers. You don't rape people in the middle of the street. You don't go ahead and kill 250 people at a peace festival. And I just have to make it a point to say that the people living on the border communities around Gaza, those are the people who are the Palestinians' biggest advocates within Israel. And the fact that they went and decimated those communities is something that I think is very, very telling. It just showed that, number one, they were so hubris that they went ahead and tried to go ahead and take over big, large swaths of the country itself. But at the same time, they didn't do it in a way that conveyed that they were fighting a resistance. They didn't go after the army. They went after the civilians. And they took the babies. And Mr. Saleh, Israel has never taken a baby. The people being released from jail today are people who try to stab people, people who are fighting, people who have guns.
I'm not going to let you get away with that. Israel has killed 4,000 children or 5,000
4,000 children who had machine guns in their hand. 4,000 children who had knives in their hands. Please. Let's call a spade a spade.
What planet?
A baby does not have a knife in their hand. A baby does not have a machine gun in their hand.
What planet are you on? Tell me.
I'm on the planet with internet. I'm on the planet with internet where everybody can go ahead and see exactly the crimes that these quote-unquote children have done. As a matter of fact, the
children that are 4 years old and 3 years old
Telegram.
And 9 months old children that they were killed by Israel.
When?
5,000 of them at least, maybe more.
When?
They were killed during the last few weeks.
Oh, okay. But what happened before October 7th? What was the justification for October 7th? What was the justification for October 7th?
Yeah, because Israel was occupying the area.
They were occupying the area. There was not one Israeli soldier in Gaza. Gaza actually had its own economy. Gaza.
You don't have to have soldiers there. You cut off food. You cut off everything from Gaza.
Really?
Yeah, occupying the West Bank and killing Palestinians on a daily basis in the West Bank. And you got your settlers running around wreaking havoc.
People in the West Bank who were actually shooting at Israeli soldiers. Yes, we killed people who shot at Israeli soldiers. I agree with that.
Against every 300 Palestinians you kill there. How many prisoners have you taken?
Proportionality has nothing to do with how many people die on one side versus the other. It's what one country needs to do
on a different planet.
On their own borders. I'm not living on a
different
planet. I'm living in the real world.
Because Israel has killed 13,000 civilians, unarmed civilians, and 6,000 children under the age of 16 that Israel had killed with their bombing.
And you're expecting the entire world to believe Hamas's numbers. You're expecting the world to believe Hamas's numbers.
These are
the
not
Gaza Ministry of Health is Hamas. Yeah, which independent international agency has verified them?
If you're doubting that children have been killed in Gaza, then you got some other problem.
No, I'm not doubting it. I'm not doubting it. I'm saying it's tragic. What I'm saying, though, is 49 days ago, Hamas launched a massive assault against a community in Israel. And up until this day, Israel is still trying to get the correct figure of the amount of dead. So how can you tell me that if Israel bombs a building and that building collapses, automatically 500 people are dead and 300 of them are babies? You can't. The numbers cannot be real unless they're actually verified and things are investigated.
There's a list of everybody who died, and every child that gets buried is on a register, and the register has been provided to all the media.
By whom? By whom? By whom? By whom?
I'm not going to argue. If you don't believe that Israel is killing people in Gaza, you got some other problems you need to deal with.
Is the victim, who is the oppressor? That changes based on who we're talking to. But the distinction, Mr. Saleh, that the world is trying to make is that what happened on October 7th was an act of terror. That's not people fighting for the Palestinian cause. There are countries that stand...
It may have been an act of terror, but it was in response to act of terrors that Israel has been conducting for the last 56 years.
Sure, and that's what the Palestinian people have been saying, but that does not justify what happened on the 7th of October, which is what has led us to where we are today. But I want to get in Edward P. Joseph in on this as well. And, you know, we're talking about what has happened not just in the last month and a half, but like Mr. Saleh was also pointing out, this is something that has been going on for decades together. Many countries like the United States have been accused of trying to wade in when it's convenient and then trying to gloss over and turn a blind eye when it's convenient to them. Do you think that's also part of the problem?
We'll turn to the U.S. policy in a sec, but let me say that Mr. Saleh is correct in respect that this conflict goes back decades. And what he neglects is, of course, that there is actions and agency on both sides, and which go back to the beginning, when we can find a beginning, which was the UN partition of then Palestine, the British mandate in Palestine in 1947, which did provide for a Palestinian state, and in which Jerusalem would have been under an internationalized city. And unfortunately, that was rejected. The Palestinian state was rejected. Arab states waged war on the nation state. I'm sorry, I'm reading from a University of Michigan report on this, and the University of Michigan is highly favorable. Please do not interrupt me, sir. I did not interrupt you. And I conceded to you that there are concerns, and Mr. Salah, I will concede to you as well that Israeli policies in the West Bank have been oppressive, and this settlement growth is wrong and oppressive. So I'm conceding that to you, Mr. Salah, and I would appreciate perhaps if you would concede some complicity and mistakes on the part of Palestinians, and especially it would be good if you would acknowledge the mistakes and the policies of Hamas, which are not about liberation. And it is incorrect to say that, because it's not just that Israel was having a blockade. It is Egypt that is also providing that blockade. And Mr. Salah, you need to address why President Sisi also, prior and subsequent to October 7th, maintains the blockade on Gaza. You need to address that. And one other question. It wasn't because of oppression. Mr. Salah, please. I did not interrupt you. I ask you respectfully, please do not interrupt me. Hamas's objectives were not liberation. What they were afraid of, the active catalyst for this, was the fear of the deal with Saudi Arabia. And everyone knows that Saudi Arabia would have insisted upon, for diplomatic relations with Israel, would have insisted upon justice for the Palestinians, justice that I want to see, that many also who are Israeli citizens, I am not, I'm an American citizen, but many Israelis also want to see justice for Palestinians. And that would have absolutely been integral to that understanding with Saudi Arabia, and Hamas could not accept that. They would have been marginalized, and their vision for exterminating, annihilating Israel would have been gone. And that's the fact, and that's what President Biden here, we turn to American policy, he understands this. President Biden understands this, and he wrote just this past week in the Washington Post, we stand firmly with the Israeli people as they defend themselves against the murderous nihilism of Hamas. Mr. Salah, you can take that up with President Biden. That is his position. That is the position.
I'm not going to interrupt you, but you can't talk for the rest of the day.
Murderous nihilism.
Sure.
Justice for the Palestinians is what we want to see. Hamas is not part of that vision.
And that distinction is something that I was talking about earlier as well. But Faisal Saleh, go ahead. You had a rebuttal to make. Yes, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, Egypt and some of the other countries that you referred to are client states of the United States, and the United States dictates to them their political position and in full control of all these countries. So let's not bring that as a key factor, because it's not. The Saudi deal, all this stuff is all under U.S. control, and U.S. is supporting Israel 100% and complicit in everything Israel is doing. So basically, for all intents and purposes, these are considered one party in this situation. I mean, I'm a Palestinian. My family had a house and property and businesses in a village 5 kilometers east of Jaffa. We were driven out of there at gunpoint. And that is the biggest injustice that was done to 800,000 Palestinians. And
what
those
year?
Palestinians are 10 million people.
What
now.
year? What year were you driven out? Just out of curiosity.
This particular thing started in 1947 when
was your family driven out?
Zionist forces. Don't interrupt me, because I didn't interrupt. You wanted no interruption, so you got to give me that too. So there was a plan by the Zionist forces to expel and depopulate all of the Palestinian cities and villages in Palestine, and that began in 47 and went on until well into 1949. The result of it was 500 cities and villages that were totally depopulated, some at gunpoint. There were 36 massacres that took place to terrorize the rest of the population in fleeing. So that is the big problem. That is the fundamental
Saleh, I don't think anybody is disagreeing to that. We had Edward P. Joseph also come out and concede to that, the fact that yes, there have been these instances, these excesses in the past, but this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how there is a distinction from what happened, what has been happening for decades, and what happened on the 7th of October, why we're actually here. Unfortunately, I'm completely out of time. I leave it at that. I have to thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here on this broadcast with your perspective. We do hope that this 4-day ceasefire runs successfully. Hostages are back home. Palestinians are back home as well. Shifting focus now to an issue here in India. This is coming in from Uttarakhand, from Uttarkashi, where the rescue of the tunnel, or the people 41 trapped in the tunnel, unfortunately has been halted again. It's been 13 days. There is no respite coming to the fore for those 41 laborers. The auger machine, which was used in the rescue operations, has unfortunately broken down. It has now been taken off, is what we're learning. We are expecting a briefing coming in from the site in just a few minutes from now to get us the latest update. But Anshul, my colleague, joining us, getting us more details on this. Anshul, what is the status? We initially, a couple of hours ago, were told that perhaps tonight's the night where these 41 laborers could taste freedom at last. But unfortunately, I don't think that's happening.
So yes, we have been reporting that how the American auger machine initially started working yet again at approximately 4:30 in the evening, and it actually, once the machine started, it was successfully able to drill to 2.5 meters of the debris. At this point in time, 49 meters of tunnel has already been dug. Post that, another obstacle, metal objects came to the fore, and now the auger machine is yet again being withdrawn. And now authorities are also looking at other options through which this digging operation could happen. One of those is manually as well. But yes, nothing has been confirmed at this point in time. A meeting is going to happen within the next few hours in which it will be decided if the further future course of action of drilling through the debris is going to be through the auger machine or is it going to be manually. If at all it happens manually, then the time that it would take for them to reach anywhere close to where the workers are might extend to 2 days now. So yes, this call has to be taken by the authorities if at all they want to go ahead and try the auger machine yet again, or if they are planning to go ahead and carry on with the manual digging as well. Because remember, over the last 48 hours, there has been very little to no success that has been found by the American auger machine. In fact, the 45-meter mark was reached approximately 48 to 60 hours ago, and now today as we are speaking, that mark is somewhere around 48.8 to 49 meters is what we are being told. So yes, no respite for the workers who are staying inside.
It's the last stretch, but unfortunately that's taking longer than expected. 12 days and counting. There seemed to be some light at the end of the tunnel for these 41, but unfortunately their wait continues for now. Anshul, thank you so much for getting us the latest from on ground there. With that, it's time for a quick break here on this edition of The Right Stand. But on the other side, there's an exclusive interaction with author Hinduism Gupta. Do stay tuned for that.
Hello, Moto.
Co-powered by
Pediatrician and nephrologist who's with us this morning to bring us more details on this entire story. Dr. Bagai, good morning. Thank you for joining us here on the show. Dr. Bagai, if I may ask you, I assume you've been looking at the reports that are coming out of China right now. China's just told the World Health Organization that there are no unrecognizable pathogens in this spreading, this pneumonia that they're calling. What does that mean? Can you just break down to our audiences? And the reports coming out of China, do they strike you as a cause for worry or not, sir?
Yeah, so China is always a cause of worry. What is available in public domain is these are viral pneumonias or bacterial pneumonias, we are not sure. There are nodular lesions in the chest. There are reports of respiratory syncytial virus, influenza, or mycoplasma pneumonia. Now, these are highly transmissible and airborne diseases. It can go from close contact, person to person, through fomites and various other modes of transmission, human to human transmission. It's more rapidly progressive, especially pathogenic in smaller children and school-going children and infants. So far, I think we've got no concise data or cause or etiology as far as China is concerned. My only concern is that there may be another cover-up, much like they did in COVID, of concealing and misleading facts and then ultimately misinformation. So I think WHO needs to go into overdrive, send the team there, get the samples analyzed, do the serology, and let the world know what is happening. If a child has it in an index family, there is what we call as household transmission. Adults can get it. There is free flow of international traffic and travel. This may actually exit the boundaries of China very, very soon and go into other Southeast Asian countries and indeed into Asia and Europe and elsewhere. So I think we need a very, very firm control on this. And I think WHO needs to be a lot more stricter, sterner and a lot more proactive than what they did in the early part of COVID.
Can I also ask you, sir, one of the sort of unfortunate byproducts of COVID is that we've heard of multiple cases of quote-unquote mysterious illnesses that have taken place across the world. To some degree, we've almost become averse. We hear the story and it's a story we've almost become used to. When you come to know stories like this, how do you know which are the stories to pay attention to? Which are the ones where there are red flags? For example, this one where you're saying there is a cause for concern.
Yeah, so I think any outbreak, be it an initial epidemic of whatever magnitude, small, medium or large, I think needs a very careful attention. We've learned, and then through the hard way, through COVID, that we didn't pay adequate attention to what China was doing. And then the infection spread very, very rapidly. Within a couple of months, it had reached Italy, Europe, Southeast Asia, and then rest of the world. So anything which is airborne, any viral or bacterial infection which has human-to-human transmission or household contact transmission needs very, very aggressive attention. The other concern is we don't know what the impact of the immune status is after the prolonged zero COVID lockdown. And I'm sure there will be a lot of variations and a lot of mutations in a host of viruses because the society at large has not been exposed to develop what we call as the natural immunity. So there are a lot of factors to be considered from an immunological point of view, but I think this is a red flag. We need to be cautious. We cannot believe what China says. That we've learned through the hard way. And I would request that WHO sends its team immediately and gets an unbiased report within a week or so.
Okay, can I ask you one last question, sir? One of the things you talked about a little earlier was that the World Health Organization was not as proactive when COVID took place. If we were to assume the organization may act similarly in this case too, sir, what can India do, especially because in some ways we have porous borders in the sense that travel takes place China to India, India to China every day. You have flights going, for example. Is there more at this moment India can do, or would it be too early?
I think we need to start just looking out for early signs. If the infection is still localized in China, the real worry is that no one believes what China says. So the real impact is that especially in international traffic, we then, for any passenger who's been to China or recently, at least in the past 2 weeks, would have to be screened in exit and entry. That puts a huge manpower and financial resource burden on the parent country and the neighboring countries. So I think we need to be very, very careful. India is a very strong representation in WHO, and I would request the Indian government to put adequate pressure on WHO to screen what is happening there, to get the serology and put it in public domain. No one is safe till everyone is safe. And I think China can't play hide and seek like they did last time.
The World Health Organization officially seeking a detailed report from the nation on an increase in respiratory illnesses and cases of pneumonia in children. This move came after media reports that Chinese hospitals have been overwhelmed with sick children in two regions in particular, one of which is the capital, Beijing. This is as an outbreak of pneumonia escalates in cities across the country, and this is as the country continues to grapple, remember, with the aftermath of COVID. Still, this is the World Health Organization. They asked Chinese authorities of this. Now, these are the updates we have so far. We'll wait for a reporter to join us to bring us more details. But it is reported also that China has responded to it. We'll share China.
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this very, very special conversation with someone who's not just a friend, but with whom I connect through his books quite a bit. And he oftentimes says it as it is while trying to maintain what many would look at as balance. But his latest book, Soul and Sword, makes us think and also perhaps draw inferences and look back at the history of the origins of political Hinduism and its continuum. Is it a thought continuum? Has it been there within our systems for thousands of years, or should we just look back about 400-500 years and say, where is the inception? So let's talk to Hindol Sengupta and understand what made him write this. Hindol, good to speak with you. First up.
Lovely to talk to you.
So, Soul and Sword, the title and the thought. Let's start from there.
Well, in political Hinduism, there's of course the soul part, because there's obviously, many of the thinkers that contributed to political Hinduism were people who had deep spiritual roots. I'm of course thinking at the moment of people like Vivekananda, people like Rishi Aurobindo and others. But even before that, even if you look at the word Hindutva, for instance, it first appears in Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Anandamath. Anandamath, of course, is the book that gives us Vande Mataram. Yeah. Now, what is Anandamath about? It is about these warrior monks, fighting from forests. So the soul part of it is irretrievably connected to the sword part of it in the history of political Hinduism. I mean, think about Shivaji Maharaj, right? Shivaji Maharaj, many would argue, not only a great warrior, but an extremely thoughtful, spiritual man, right? So this connection is very deep and has been continuing for a long time. So therefore, soul and sword.
No, but if you look at our own references, as far as our own vigrahas or deities are concerned, Mahavishnu has,
that's right.
The sword or the Sudarshan in one hand, and the Padma or the lotus on the other, and the conch and the mace. So they go left and right. With Shiva is the same thing. So you have the Trishul and the Damru going hand in hand. But Hinduism, many would say, why use ism? Those who advocate, strong advocates of Hindutva or dharmic route of governance would say, why use isms?
So, I think that bit of debate is a very esoteric debate, and I think that will continue. But this book was not only published in India, but it's out around the world. It's published in America and so on and so forth. So I make it very clear in the very beginning of my book, in the first chapter, that I'm not talking about Hinduism, the religion, at all. I'm talking about political Hinduism. Every faith has political connotations, because after all, faiths exist among human beings in the world. Correct. If it didn't exist in the world, they wouldn't have to deal with the world, and therefore politics. But at the end of the day, it exists in the world, so there's always going to be an interaction and a conversation with politics. And my book is about the conversation of Hinduism with politics and political Hinduism. It is not about the religion at all.
So do you go all the way far back as Kautilya to try and draw the inception and the origins, or further back?
Yeah.
Or do you want to look at say 1100 AD onwards?
So, as a historian, I make the argument that you will never be able to find an origin moment, so to speak. Because, some people will say, well, just because we mentioned Shivaji Maharaj, he was fighting not as a Hindu king, but just as a ruler. Some others would say, no, of course not. He said Hindavi Swarajya. He was definitely fighting as a Hindu king or a Hindu warrior. But there is no end to this argument. I actually use historical methodology to say this argument is futile. What we have to ask ourselves, which is what I do in the book, is the people who conceptualized political Hinduism, what was their self-narration? How were they looking at history? How were they looking at points of history? And that very clearly, as I mentioned in my book, their self-narration is very clearly from the beginning of the resistance to invasions to India. So I go back to the 1st century and so on and so forth, and I talk about various rulers and so on and so forth. Remember, I also mentioned in my book that we talk about the Ghaznavid and the Gauri invasions, but there is a 200-300 period in between where there are the invasions are stopped. Who stops those invasions? And they are all Hindu rulers. So all of these points of reference that embody the world of political Hinduism, I narrate into one timeline, one trajectory, to give us and the world a sense of what political Hinduism is. And this is all important because it connects to India's today.
Yeah.
Right? So these are not just esoteric things in history.
Correct. So let's come there, because there are those who want to derive a political inference from the geographical relevance of Hindu or Hind. Because even in Arabic and Farsi we have references of Al-Hindi, so the land between the Indus and the ocean, and even Shankaracharya describes it. The other one is spiritual, way of life, inclusion. The third one, like you said, could be the military political origins. So is there an overlap between all of this?
There is. There is certainly an overlap, because you see, at the end of the day, if you look at the imagination of political Hinduism, that it derives itself from the land is impossible to escape, right? You know, this entire idea of a sacred geography. You know, of course, in India, everybody thinks Diana Ek was the first person who came and talked about the sacred geography, but that's not true. People like Radha Kumud Mukherjee and others had been talking about sacred geography for far longer than Diana Ek. And in fact, one could go back to the Puranas and say, you know, the sacred geography idea comes from there.
Yeah,
right?
Vishnu Purana is mentions
Of course,
it, yeah.
right? So this sacred geography is very important. That's why the defense of sacred geography is important. I mentioned in my book, why was Sardar Patel so, hell-bent on ensuring that Somnath is restored? At his dying bed, Sardar Patel gives that task to be completed, right? And says, you must complete this task and so on and so forth. Why is it finally that, the first president defies Nehru to say that, no, I will, Rajendra Prasad says, I will go and inaugurate Somnath. It's because Somnath is an emblem. Somnath in the universe of political Hinduism is an emblem of our indigenous resistance. Right? And it's very important to note, and I mentioned this in the book, people think of political Hinduism only as a BJP thing.
Correct.
That's not correct. Actually, many people, I would think of, people like Patel and many others to have contributed in some ways to the overall thought process of political Hinduism. There were many people who were at that time part of the Congress. The Congress had all these sides, right? There was the left in the Congress, and then there was the conservatives in the Congress.
And then there was the Garam Dal in the Congress also.
All kinds of things, right? And the extreme left and so on and so forth. But the so-called sort of conservatives in the Congress actually were many people who contributed heavily to, the thinking process of political Hinduism. Think about Madan Mohan Malviya, for instance, and many others, right? And I mentioned that in the book. In fact, I mentioned in the book that if you read early Savarkar and early Nehru, and this, of course, would be blasphemous to many people. But if you read early Savarkar and early Nehru, their conceptions of the nation are nearly identical.
But did Sardar Patel, Shama Prasad Mukherjee carry forward that thought continuum? And somewhere, Dr. Hedgewar and Veer Savarkar decided to go separate ways. Their thought process with the RSS, thought process with the Hindu Mahasabha was different. But did they align themselves in this concept of political Hinduism? You draw certain parallels. So
I think, the Congress was a very large umbrella, right? I think there were many places where there was a break. One place, of course, was in this idea that should the movement entirely be non-violent, an idea in which not only Gandhiji but even Patel and others were strident that it has to be non-violent. Whereas many others derived inspiration from the revolutionary part of our history. Certainly Savarkar, who had spent all those years in Kalapani and so on and so forth, said that no, it doesn't always have to be non-violent. There was a break there also.
Subhash Babu also.
And Subhash Babu, of course, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and many others, right? But remember, even till Patel's time, there was a proposal that many people who are part of the RSS could also join the Congress.
But the Congress always, the narrative is that Patel banned RSS.
But Patel also lifted the ban on RSS. As I mentioned in my book, it is there in my Patel biography, it is there in this book also. Yes, it is true that Patel banned the RSS, but it is true that Patel also wrote to Nehru saying, I have examined all the files and so on and so forth, and there is no connection, there is only a connection with the Hindu Mahasabha, and he lifted the ban also. So it's a complex history. Remember, but this dual membership, which was open even in Patel's time, in JP's time, the same thing would come up too, as I mentioned in the book. Yes. Look at the continuum. You began this interview talking about the continuum. Here we see the continuum. That idea of dual membership comes up with JP's time too. That's why people like Vajpayee and others step out and say, no, we will not give up our RSS roots. We will create a different party instead. And that's why the BJP. So remember, the BJP's, one of the BJP's founding articles even today talks about Gandhian socialism. That was just a phrase that was used commonly at that time, so it's there. But if you look a little deeply, what does it mean? Look, if you read Dattopant Hengdi and Upadhyay and all these people, they are very clear that India existed for all these years and was able to maintain its society even with all the invasions and conquests and all of that because it had certain inherent attributes. And those attributes, they say, come from India's own spiritual understanding of two things. Time being cyclical, unlike in the West, time is linear. So your karma will always catch up with you. Your excess, you cheat somebody, you go into crazy conspicuous consumption, all of this will come back to you one day. That's one. The second thing that they're always talking about is balance. The other great Hindu idea, that everything must have a santulan, as they say in Hindi. There must be a balance, right? That's why Dattopant Thengdi is saying communism is one extreme, capitalism is one extreme. There must be India shows the middle path. And we're seeing this today in the world. Argentina is one extreme, right? China is another extreme, right? And in a sense, India is the middle path.
Would you believe that currently, the current day Hinduism or political Hinduism, I'm using your term, does that reflect what the thought process was? Is there a balance between perhaps extreme concepts, either ways, to perhaps a more liberal going forward? So
I think
let's talk about the current and then we'll discuss the age of Ram.
No, sure. Political Hinduism by its very nature is a liberal concept. Now, and many people will get angry if I say that, right? Because people like all these borrowed terms from the West. It is a liberal concept because many of the people who thought about it first, Bonkim, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, if you genuinely deep read their philosophies, they are world embracing. Not one of them is, world rejecting. You read Aurobindo, you read Vivekananda, right? You read Bonkim. They are all entirely world embracing. So it's liberal by its very nature. There is only one thing that political Hinduism has, which is extra. It has a sense of Shatru Bodh. What is Shatru Bodh?
Know your enemy.
A clear understanding that this is my enemy.
There is also this whole concept of how this Shatru Bodh, this concept of political Hinduism, is this inclusive, liberal, or is it exclusive? Does it exclude non-Hindus? Where do Christians fit in it? Where do Muslims fit in it? And you quote an interview that Khushwant Singh had with MS Golwalkar. So let's talk about that. So there is clarity there too?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's always been clarity in the world of political Hinduism that India is for all Indians who live in India. All Indians who live in India have this cultural heritage that belongs to everybody. Some people may want to reject it. That's an entirely different story, but that's their problem, not the problem of the rest of Indians who embrace it. And there should not be any, issue about this at all. Please remember, even the Ram temple that is being built, the Supreme Court itself allocated even greater land for the restoration and building of a mosque in the same town, right? So there has always been a very clear understanding that a common cultural heritage is available for every Indian, and every Indian who is part of our country is part of it, right? And I don't see why this is a debate at all, Anand. Allow me just 30 seconds. Think about it. In America, can a single president become president without clearly stating that they are Christian? No. Would you say America is
Vivek Ramaswamy is being asked the question.
That's right. So, but is America a illiberal country? Does anyone say that? No. Everybody is living there. Hindus are, the world's biggest Hindu temple is being built there, right? India, similarly, India, no matter its Hindu cultural ethos or roots, has Asia's biggest church in Nagaland. Right? Correct. So I'm just saying that why is this a debate only in India but not in any other country? It's not a debate in any other country.
No, because we've never insisted on
we have not.
Our leaders, president, prime minister, or whoever, to be necessarily Hindu. We've never argued that, made that argument. Neither does our constitution stipulate that compared to the others. But why is it that we are looked as and especially under the current leadership that advocates political Hinduism, as intolerant, as illiberal? Where does that perception come from? Kadyayani is here. Right.
This conception has, I think,
this whole thing about Khalistan. Look at the Khalistan narrative. Canada, trouble is Khalistan. That itself is bumkum. So,
no, I think see these things are in the realm of political polemics, so to speak. You know, people say all kinds
Even
of
the
things.
map is so distorted. It's
Yeah,
not
the map is distorted and people keep doing this for mischievous intent and so on and so forth. I would stick as a historian to the broader concepts and the deeper issues. And I think in that I'm very clear. The age of Ram is essentially, which is the name of the last chapter of my book, the age of Ram is fundamentally a liberal age. Maryada Purushottam Ram is a fundamentally principled entity, so to speak.
So, but liberal not where Hindus are apologetic about being
No,
Hindu.
there is
liberal
there is
where
no.
you have a clear concept of what is India and what is
when the
which
Sarayu
Chhatrapati.
river fills with 1 million lamps, there is nothing apologetic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
So the age of apologia is gone. I think we should no longer discuss even the idea of apologia. That is gone. The age of Ram is to entirely embrace your cultural heritage, celebrate it, at the same time ensuring that everybody feels included. Some people will mischievously
in just a second with you. We'll also bring you more details. Remember, China has been dealing with this, what they've called a mysterious pneumonia outbreak that's spread particularly in Chinese schools, as we've told you, resulting in hospitals being overwhelmed.
Hello, welcome to Brass Tacks. I'm Zakir Jacob. The ongoing political tussle between governors and various state governments of various opposition-ruled states now seems to be hitting a decisive legal turn. The Supreme Court yesterday issued strict instructions to the governor of Punjab, saying that he cannot indefinitely sit on bills, and in case there are differences, he has to refer the bill back to the concerned legislature. The court in its order also made it clear that governors do not have any virtual veto powers over the legislature. The question that needs to be asked then is, will this set the template for governors in other states, in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and other states where governors have been at loggerheads with their respective state governments? But first, the story so far.